Hi, it's Brian Parker. I'm back with a video. I said I would come back after the review team had its report published, and they've done that. There's a link below if you have not had an opportunity to read the report that Phil Griffin and Dan Hotchkiss put together. Many of you know Phil. He is a respected lay leader here in MCC, very well trusted. I thank him for his time and effort on this. Dan Hotchkiss, for those of you who don't know Dan, I know Dan. I worked with him when I was on the governing board. He is a paid consultant to MCC. We have hired him many times to assist the governing board in both really developing how we operate. After the 2010 restructuring, we used Dan and his book to help us create the organization as we know it today. And he was hired again to do this report. So that's who Dan and Phil are. And so I thank them for the report. I bet they wish they had a little bit more time to be a bit more thorough than they did. I do know that maybe there wasn't enough time to do everything, but I do know that, for example, in the report it indicates that Reverend Karen Thompson was not interviewed, and there was trouble contacting her, or she didn't respond. I've learned, and I'll let others confirm that if you want, that Reverend Karen Thompson was indeed interviewed. Unfortunately, it was only like a day or two before this report was publicized, so the edits didn't occur as she was told they would. But just want to make sure that, again, they were pressed for time and probably would have liked to have done a few more thorough things here in editing. The report doesn't really reveal anything that we didn't already know, right? So I think it confirms everything that we were asking about. It certainly confirms, and I want to be very clear about this, that the Moderators Nominating Committee followed its process, and they want to be assured, this team that reviewed assured that there was no violation of their process or wrongdoings. Don't think any of us have ever questioned whether or not the MNC violated their process. Many of the questions that we had about the MNC was to explain their process a little bit more and to explain their thought process. So I don't think we were ever questioning whether or not they violated the process that was laid out by the bylaws or later by the actual policies, that their process that they put together. I and others, and I'm very candid still, we questioned their judgment maybe a little bit. Why didn't you put a fifth person forward when you could have? And after we had two of the applicants who were sort of going through the whole process and then found out prior to the release of the slate that they weren't going to be on the slate, those two self-revealed. So we know two of them, and knowing many of us, knowing them and knowing their qualifications, and then seeing the slate, we do question the judgment. We kind of go, really? But I know, there's apparently some great insight and wisdom that the Moderators Nominating Committee has that we will never know, and we'll leave that. But again, I think that they always followed their process, and I wasn't questioning their violation of their process. And if anybody was telling them, hey, they're out to get you, that they're going to do this investigation, I would have been annoyed, because quite frankly I saw that as a divergent tactic here to take the attention off of those who the report does indicate could have done a better job in their role as leaders, with disclosure, with transparency, with communication, and they shifted it to, we're investigating the MNC, and that never was really the crux of what we were asking here. So congratulations, MNC. I think you did a fine job. I think that you followed your process and your procedures the way you should have. What the report does do is it does affirm exactly the things that we brought up, Liz and I and others had brought up earlier on, asking if two of the candidates had any participation in this process prior to them becoming candidates. When we were initially asked the question, we were basically told no. The report indicates here that they at least had some input in providing names for the alternate lay delegates. It doesn't address the fact that the meeting minutes from the governing board indicate that Onetta also asked them to review and get feedback on the process documents themselves, not just the alternate. That's also in the meeting minutes. And if I'm reading the minutes correctly, that they also had access to a Google Drive that had these documents on it. So what the report does say is that it's a bit unclear. It could have been handled better. I'm summarizing here, and that the appointment of the alternate, they sort of downplay it, which is unfortunate too. That's a very important role. Don't downplay being an alternate on any committee. But basically, it says in here there is no clear conflict here, as there is no policy in place to require the disclosure or recusal. However, it does raise questions about transparency. There doesn't have to be a policy written and in place to be a leader of discernment, with discernment, who says, you know what, I think I'm going to run for this position, and this may be a little bit too close of an involvement for me. It may even just create this appearance of conflict of interest, which it has, which may cause some problems, which it has, which may call into question the integrity of the process, which it has. So I'm going to step back from it. So that's about leadership. And I don't think it needs to be specifically in writing every single time. And if it does, then we need to get to work, because we have a very long manual for our leaders and our elders to start following. I think one of the key things about leadership is judgment and discernment, and that was a bit missed here. Not only was it missed, even if they were not planning on running at the time, maybe that revelation came to them after all their involvement. It immediately should have come up with, we need to be transparent about this. Not only should they have been transparent about it, but the liaison to the governing board and the M&C should have been transparent about it, who also serves as the clerk of the board, when we asked the question, and that transparency was painfully lacking. So it raised those questions. We also have, as the report indicates, very lightly, which is the way we do things in MCC. We ignore the elephants sitting in the room, I think, too often. But it does very lightly make a sort of, hey, the liaison role could have been a bit better in the way it was handled. It does try to shift most of the blame to say, well, there wasn't really a clear definition of the role and responsibility there. I'll just, knowing the folks who are involved with this and their ability to be a policy wonk, if you will, like me, if there was any ambiguity as to what their role was, I think they would have asked for clarification and a definition. But what it does say is that the original draft of the charter of the moderator's nominee referred to the position as consultant/liaison. However, the final approved charter called it only liaison. They later go in, which is very important, to define the difference between a liaison and a consultant. Liaison is somebody who just facilitates communication between the two parties or individuals, and the consultant is one who gives advice. There is times that it appears that our liaison was serving as a consultant, which was not what the charter called for them to do. And there are times that I believe, and as a result of the confusion and the surprise that happened with the governing board around things like were elders eligible to run, that communication aspect of the liaison role was not conducted in a very thorough manner. It's interestingly enough that same lack of thorough, appropriate, and communication seems to be lacking when that same individual serves as her role as clerk of the board. So as clerk of the board, Reverend Brooks is responsible for communications when people contact and responding back, and just as she did in signing and being part of drafting a communication back to Liz and I, we later come to find out, or actually they told us at the very beginning, it was a communication that she, Nancy, and SJ drafted and did not get the input from the entire governing board, sent it to us and in response, and it was mendacious in nature in that it was lacking information when we specifically asked what was the involvement of the elders in this process, and where Darlene and Hector, that was really what was at the crux of this, because your meeting minutes said they were they involved with this? Were two of those candidates involved with this process? And the response back to us was pretty much nope, wasn't involved. And now we got the report, We always had the meeting minutes that said they were, but now we have the report that says, hey, they were. At least the report only addresses the alternate delegate. I would like for them to also be transparent in their weeks that follow here before General Conference during their election process to reveal and disclose their participation in the review of and the feedback they gave on the process and the process documents and their access to those documents on Google Drive, how long they had those access to the documents, and if indeed they had access or were participating in any of this after they had made the decision to submit their application to moderator. Now, I want to go back to a quick thing that I said here about, we sent, Liz and I sent a letter to the entire governing board, and we got a response back, again, a response that was lacking in its thoroughness and a bit misleading, and as I said, mendacious and very significant ways. Omitting information, I think, is just as bad as outright being deceitful. But Gail Risler, as you know, she was a member of the governing board. She resigned. 3 of our members resigned. Also mentioned in the review report, real brief on that, bad placement of their mentioning of their resigning. It talks about when the release of slate of candidates, the candidates were leaked, and then these motions that happened, and then then this resignation. I want to be very clear, none of them resigned because they were responsible for any leaking of information. They didn't resign because they were pressured to resign from the governing board. They resigned. I'll let them speak for it themselves. Gail mentions it a little bit. But they resigned because they just had enough. They didn't want to participate in this level of miscommunication and dishonesty that was taking place. But Gail wrote a very thoughtful and thorough timeline and letter. It's 12 pages in length. I encourage you to read that alongside of the review report. That it's important here. She says, I wanted you to be aware that the public responses provided to the governing board to date have not reflected the thoughts of the majority of the governing board, and definitely not included the governing input from governors holding a dissenting view. So I've documented my understanding of the governing board dissenting view in this letter. Then she goes on to explain what is in the letter, and she provides a very detailed timeline of key events. She gives insight into the public yet unpublished dissenting view. It's important. She summarizes concerns related to the MCC moderator slate of candidates, including the process and end document. She provides information to the best of her ability without using information identified as confidential, and she provides insight as to why she resigned. She wants us to be aware that the public responses provided by the governing board have not reflected the thoughts of the majority of the governing board. I go back to the one little paragraph that the review team put in there where it appears our liaison, who's our chair of the governance committee, who is the clerk of the governing board, acted as a consultant single-handedly without going back and communicating thoroughly to the rest of her team and collaborating with her peers. That's in their report. Sure, we could have other incidences that are pulled out of there. Gail points out that the communications have gone out are not that of the entire governing board, do not represent the entire governing board. It was made clear to us when we asked the questions and got a response back that we were only getting a response back from SJ, Nancy, and Onetta Brooks as the clerk of the board, acting, single-handedly, or in this case, the 3 of them, not even a majority of the board responding to us. I think what happens is after a period of time, people serving in a role may get a little bit too comfortable and a little bit too complacent, and perhaps ego and hubris come into play where they think that they can act single-handedly and that they are authorized to do what they can do, and they may even be able to point to policies and procedures that say, hey, this is what I'm able to do. And there's a difference between what is written and what is right. And there's a difference between having a role on a committee and on a board and being one who collaborates and compromises and uses the full spectrum of truth to communicate. And that was lacking here. And I think part of that happens because 6 years is a long time to serve on a board. And I think after 6 years, just that complacency sets in, not with everybody, but if you've been in a role for 6 years, I think you probably get a little bit too comfortable and think, I don't need to I know what I'm doing. I don't need anybody else's insight here. It's a dangerous thing. And, interestingly enough, of our members who were elected to 6-year terms back in 2010, only 2 of the 4 remain on the governing board. The others have, one went on to take on a different position, so had to resign, and the other resigned over all of this conflict that has taken place. And there's, of the 2 who remained, one of their names keeps popping up in this report. They have roles and responsibilities, and as the liaison, as the governance chair, and as the clerk of the board, where their communication seems to be less than I was going to say perfect. I don't expect anyone to be perfect, but less than truthful all the time. And it's just sloppy. And maybe that's just because they're coming to the end of their term. I don't know. But what I do know and what I do think is that 6 years is a very long time, and I think it does contribute to this sort of complacency that happens. And if anything, I think that MCC needs to take a look at the length that our governors serve, and definitely probably put a term limit on so that they only serve one term, because 6 years is sort of proving to be a little bit sloppy for our folks once they get to that point. And we don't need that. We definitely don't need it for 12 years. So with that, there are some recommendations the review team put together. I agree with just about all of them. I think that Darlene and Hector do need to disclose during the selection process what their involvement was, not just with the alternates, but again, going back to the process feedback they gave and if they had access to documents. And I agree with the recommendation that this review team put together, that going forward there has to be a closer relationship with the governing board and the moderators nominating committee. Their recommendation, one of the recommendations, is that a member of the governing board is the chair of the moderators nominating committee. Great idea. I would take it a step further and say we need even more oversight, because we're proving again that role for one person to handle seems to be a bit too much, that things slip through the cracks, that complacency, whatever, expedience of response come into play, whatever it is, that somebody was acting on their own as a consultant and not going back and communicating thoroughly and properly with the rest of their governors. So I think that actually 2 people should be involved on the governing board with the MNC. Maybe one is the chair and one is truly just the liaison, sort of doing oversight to make sure that the communication is accurate and reflects what truly is going on. And again, if nothing else, just for checks and balances, so that they can say, yep, we did everything properly. So that would be the one suggestion that I would make there as well. The one thing that I don't necessarily agree with, it says we strongly urge all members of the MCC leadership to support the elections process. They're encouraging local pastors and lay leaders, as well as governing board members, elders, and senior leadership, to encourage moving forward in the spirit of confidence, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Love confidence, forgiveness, and reconciliation. I also love the wisdom of the voice of the General Conference, and I don't think that we should just be sitting idly by and saying, yep, this is the hand that was dealt to us, and now we must go through with this process. I believe in the wisdom and the voice of General Conference, so I don't think that we need to be completely governed and ruled by a committee or somebody sitting at the front of the meeting with a gavel. So I encourage those who have that passion and are continuing to do that, our clergy and lay delegates, to continue to talk, to collaborate, and to take control of your General Conference and make sure that your voice is heard. And if it means not following this election process, so be it. So with that, I will probably be back at some point. Don't know what the next topic will be. I'm sure there will be one. But thanks for watching. Again, read the review team report, read Gail's report, and I think it will give you even more insight into all the concerns that many of us have been having over this time, and see that some of them, all of them, really have been affirmed. Thanks.